Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the work that my colleagues have done on this project, which is about enabling paramedic student learning outcomes in aged care. Just quickly, the rationale for this project, largely around the fact that the nature of the paramedic workload, caseload has changed substantially over the last couple of decades. Paramedics are now very much more involved in the care of older people with complex chronic health problems. A lot of people still think the paramedic workload is around major trauma, cardiac arrests and major medical emergencies. It's not. It's actually very rare for a paramedic to see a physiologically distressed multi-trauma patient these days. In fact, a study in Victoria done by a colleague of mine showed that paramedics saw a physiologically distressed time-critical trauma patient 1.4 times per year. The paramedic curricula at the moment is very much a historical model focusing on resuscitation and health emergencies. And unfortunately, at the moment, there's little attention paid to the care of older people with complex chronic health problems in the community. And of course, ambulance placements are a diminishing resource. This is not unique to ambulance. This is common across a lot of other health settings and disciplines, and that's one of the things that brings us here today. I think the transition from vocational industry-based training to university education for paramedics has occurred over the last few years, even though the first degree program was developed almost 20 years ago now. And we've now got about 17 universities in Australia offering undergraduate paramedic degrees that lead to employment. So ambulance clinical placements are becoming very scarce. But I need to point out that this is not a strategy to substitute ambulance placements with aged care. This project is around identifying learning opportunities in aged care that we think are important in enabling learning outcomes for our students. When I say here that ambulance placements are uncontrolled, what I mean by that is that we've actually got very little control over where the students are placed, who they're placed with, whether they're placed with a clinical supervisor, whether they get any feedback. It's a very geographically dispersed workforce. There's very challenging situation for us in trying to ensure that students are placed with someone who's keen and capable to supervise a student and provide feedback, and that's not a reflection of the Queensland Ambulance Service. This is a national phenomena with ambulance, and that it means that we've got very, very little control over the student learning experience. And one of the great things about placements in other settings such as aged care is we've got a lot more control over the learning. So in other words, we can engineer the learning to a far greater extent than we can in ambulance placements. The design of this involved meetings with key staff from aged care within our region, the Sunshine Coast region. We identified facilitators who could assist with this. We developed learning activities, a workbook with some structured learning activities for the students. We're running soon a workshop for the facilitators, so we adequately prepare them to deal with paramedic students, because most of them have not worked with paramedic students previously, and we're obviously putting in some efforts into preparing the students for this placement and making sure that they're properly orientated to this placement. There were a range of learning objectives developed as part of this. This is a very busy slide, but I just want to point out a couple of the things that are somewhat unique to this placement. One of those is the third point, which is about assessing and caring for people with cognitive impairment, particularly in the setting of diseases such as dementia. Learning how to communicate with people with cognitive impairment and how to assess for symptoms such as pain is a very important, it's not me, is it? Is a very important component of paramedic practice. They are going to see people in the community with varying degrees of dementia, some of whom suffer acute health emergencies, some of whom are going to have problems communicating their experience, And so we feel that aged care is an ideal setting to try and enable some of those skills that prepare paramedic students to care for people with cognitive impairment. We've also got some learning objectives there that deal with things like advanced medical directives and care at end of life. With that, we've got a module within the workbook that helps the students to understand what palliative care is all about. Palliative care is one of the things that's often missing from paramedic curriculum, sadly, because again, as I mentioned, the focus tends to be on saving lives. You know, that's good and it's very fulfilling to be able to do that. You do it, you know, once every 5 years. But you'd see an awful lot of people in the community with some crisis that's triggered a call for paramedics at end of life, and I think there's a lot of things that paramedics could do better in caring for people at end of life and providing support for not only the person but the family in that particular setting. We feel that there's certainly some things in aged care that could better prepare some of our students for that inevitable component of their workload. We were informed in terms of the design of this by work that colleagues have done at UTAS. This is part 2 of a 2-part study that's been published that describes their experiences with the design of aged care placements for paramedic students. We've actually learnt from some of their experiences. One of the things that the students were very critical of in this, in the UTAS experience, was a lack of structure. And a lack of clarity around what the students were meant to be doing within that aged care placement. So we've developed a workbook with some quite structured activities and very clear guidance to both the students and the facilitators about what it is we want them to be doing during their aged care placement. The placement sites that have agreed to come on board for this project are shown here, and in fact we had an overwhelming level of support from aged care facilities in the region. They could see some really strong benefits in partnering with us to place students in aged care. One of the things they felt was very important was to help paramedics better understand the role of nursing and other allied health professionals in aged care. And so that interprofessional component of it, I think, is very, very important. Paramedics do need to know that at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're called to a aged care facility, that the person they're talking to may not be a Division 1 nurse, and they shouldn't get cranky with them if they don't talk the same language. So that in itself, I think, is going to be a really beneficial part of this project. We actually, with the assistance of some very capable people within the team, in working with aged care facilities, were able to identify far more placements than we had students for. And we've got about 140 students in first year who are going to undertake this placement. It's a first year, end of first year placement for these students. And we've got excess demand, which is almost, we've never had that before. We had some problems though. We had a lot of pushback. And this is an actual quote. Not from a student, but from a paramedic who thought we're absolutely bonkers putting aged care into the program, because what the hell's that got to do with paramedics? We had a lot of pushback from students, and believe it or not, we had third-hand information that one of the students' parents were not happy as well. And you know, that's getting really serious. We had to do a lot of thinking about how we were going to sell this to the students, and some very clever people in our team came up with our simulated or our patient that would be the focus for the activities that were embedded within this aged care placement. This is Edna. Edna's a lovely person who's belongs to one of the local play groups, does work as an actor, volunteered her time for free. This, by the way, is not part of the project brief. There's no funding for this. We didn't spend any money on this. It was a last minute, oops, what are we going to do? How are we going to sell this, not only to the students but to the paramedics that that are quite critical of what we're trying to do here. So we developed a series of little videos, little vignettes that are going to take the students on a journey with Edna. Now the journey begins when Edna, who lives independently in her home that she's lived in for the last 60 years, her husband died 2 years ago, and the call to ambulance was about a fall witnessed by a neighbour. Now Edna apparently appears to be okay and is absolutely adamant that she doesn't want to travel with the paramedics for further assessment, doesn't want to participate in any further assessment. And the first challenge for the paramedics is to determine whether Edna is actually safe to leave at home. So what opportunities are there in aged care to participate in the assessment of mobility, coordination, balance, perception, risk of falls? Wonderful opportunity, because this is a real world situation. Paramedics have got to make a decision about whether someone like Edna is safe to leave at home or whether they really need to be referred or transported for further assessment and care. And so Edna's going to be the centre of attention for our students, and Edna's journey moves from home, from independent learning, into the emergency department, into aged care, and finally through an investigation of some chronic diseases associated with ageing, which includes dementia, and unfortunately through to palliative care. We had to explain to Edna that she unfortunately was going to die. But she was quite happy with that. So I can't report any outcomes of the placement because it actually the students enrol within the next couple of weeks and do some preliminary work before they do the placement in January. We are undertaking a survey of both the facilitators and the students. We are going to disseminate those results, and we hope, if it works well, that this will be a potential model for other paramedic programs. Thank you.